Henry trudged along the ice-covered seashore, his boots crunching over the hardened crust. The wind bit at his face, but he kept going, drawn by something he couldn't name. He didn't hike as far these days. His knees protested. His breath came short. But the cold kept his mind sharp, even when his thoughts turned to darker places. That's when he saw it. Down the slope, near the rocks, a shape was thrashing, white against red. A polar bear, massive and frenzied, clawed at a man on the ground. Henry didn't think. He raised his old hunting rifle, lined up a shot, and fired. The bear flinched and bolted, vanishing into the sea mist. Henry ran down, panting, his hands shaking. The man lay still. Henry turned him over and froze. The bullet hadn't missed. It had gone straight through the man's chest. The bear hadn't killed him. Henry had. His stomach turned. He knelt, trying to feel for a pulse, but it was pointless. The man was already cold. Just then, Sheriff Dan's truck rolled in over the ice, tires skidding slightly as it stopped. Dan stepped out, silent as always, eyes scanning the scene. Henry tried to explain, voice cracking. I didn't mean to." Dan looked at the body, then at Henry. "Go home," he said. "I'll handle it." 3 months passed. On the outskirts of town, 2 boys stumbled onto something buried in the snow. What they thought was just another ice chunk turned out to be ancient flesh. Wool, frozen stiff and massive. A mammoth. Entire, preserved, like it had fallen asleep and never woken up. Liam snapped off one of the teeth. His friend protested, but Liam laughed it off and stuffed the fossil into his coat. They ran back toward town, the mammoth looming behind them like a frozen god. As soon as Liam stepped through his front door, he collapsed. His mother, Jules, dropped her coffee and rushed to his side. He was burning up, feverish, eyes unfocused. Frank, Liam's father, returned home to chaos. His son was sprawled across the living room floor, soaked in sweat, his skin pale. Jules screamed at him to help. The doctor arrived that night. Margaret, steady and calm, examined Liam and frowned. She diagnosed it as MS, likely triggered by a viral infection. "He needs constant supervision," she said. "Don't leave him alone, not for a second." Across town, Ronnie and Jason saw a different opportunity. They went back for the mammoth. With ropes and winches, they hauled it to a warehouse near the docks. Jason pried loose another tooth and brought it to Professor Charlie. Charlie examined it under the harsh white light of his lab and shook his head. "This doesn't belong in a pawn shop. It belongs in a museum or a research facility. You can't sell this." Jason, furious, stormed out, taking the tooth with him. Days later, Charlie was found barely alive in his home. His abdomen had been sliced open, organs spilling out. Vincent, a scientist new to town, found him and called for help. Dan arrived minutes later and arrested Vincent on the spot. Margaret rushed to Charlie's side. Against all odds, he was still breathing. She ordered the medics to take him to the hospital immediately. Back at home, Henry's conscience had begun to rot. The man he killed, Billy, the geologist, had been unarmed. But something didn't sit right. There had been no bullet found in Billy's body, no entry wound that matched Henry's shot. He confronted Dan one night. "You were there before me," Henry said. Dan stared at him. Billy was going to die anyway. That didn't sit right either. Jules tried to hold her family together, but one night, she had to leave. Frank promised he'd watch Liam. After she left, Elena knocked on the door. Frank didn't hesitate. He led her to the shed. They didn't hear Liam's door creak open. Didn't notice him wandering out into the night, barefoot, dazed, and half-dressed. By the time Frank came back inside, Liam was in bed again, or so he thought. He didn't notice the blood on his own shirt. Jules returned and found Liam shivering, teeth chattering, screaming in pain. She threw off the blankets and saw his feet, frostbitten, blue. At the hospital, the doctors gave grim news. Liam might lose his feet. Jules turned on Frank, demanded answers. Frank said nothing and walked out. That night, Charlie's condition worsened. Margaret found strange swelling near the wound, something wrong beneath the skin. Henry stayed up late looking at old film negatives he had developed from his camera. In one frame, zoomed in tight, he spotted something he hadn't noticed before, a human hand tied to the base of a cell tower, near where Billy died. He called the police. Dan did this, Henry said. He's been hiding the truth. Somewhere in a lab across town, Charlie flatlined on the operating table, but the story was only just beginning. Liam lay in the hospital bed, pale and sweating. His feet were wrapped in gauze, black around the toes, but it was the fever that scared everyone most. He screamed in his sleep, mumbled nonsense when awake, and his eyes had a glassy, distant look, as if he wasn't fully there anymore. Margaret monitored him closely. "This isn't just frostbite," she told Jules. "Something's attacking his nervous system." Jules barely slept. She sat by Liam's side, fingers twitching with anxiety. Frank, now staying at Elena's hotel, avoided the hospital at first. But guilt pulled him back. When he returned, Jules wouldn't even look at him. Dan, meanwhile, was chasing ghosts. Natalie, Charlie's assistant, hadn't been seen since the night of the attack. Rumors swirled. Some said she ran, some said she was next. Jason's wife revealed the truth. Jason was hiding Natalie. When Dan found them, it was clear they'd been having an affair. Natalie looked exhausted, but calm. In the interrogation room, Jason explained, Charlie had dismissed the mammoth tooth, calling it a distraction from real science. Jason snapped, but he swore he didn't hurt him. He said he'd been at his brother Siren's shop the night of the attack. Dan, skeptical, confiscated the tooth and handed it to Natalie. "Tell me if it's real," he said. The next morning, Siren was missing. Dan and Frank stormed his shop and found him tied up and beaten. Siren was dazed but managed to whisper, "Ronnie did it. Took my boat. He's gone." Now the whole town was searching. For Ronnie. For the mammoth. For answers. Carrie, Ronnie's daughter, was missing too. Some feared he'd taken her. Others feared something worse. Then the blood test results came in. The blood on Frank's shirt. Charlie's. Dan confronted Frank in Elena's hotel room, bursting in while Frank was showering. Fueled by rage and jealousy, Dan beat him and dragged him into custody. In the station, Frank insisted he'd only left Liam alone briefly. He claimed Liam's throat had swollen so badly it bled. Jules refused to confirm it. Instead, she told investigators the truth. Frank left their son to have sex with Elena. That's when Liam wandered out. The confession opened the door to more discoveries. Eugene, the London inspector, dug into Elena's past and learned she'd been charged with murder before moving to town. When confronted, Elena admitted her history, but denied killing Charlie. Yet when Eugene brought up Billy's name, her expression shifted. She didn't speak, but her silence was telling. Meanwhile, Dan searched Liam's bedroom. He found the pajamas, blood-stained, torn, evidence the attack had happened inside the house. A flashback emerged. Liam standing over Charlie's writhing body, face blank, hands dripping with blood. Possessed? Maybe. But it had happened while Frank and Elena were in the shed. Vincent ran tests on Liam's brain, comparing it with tissue from the polar bear they dissected. That bear had cannibalized another, driven mad by toxins in its brain. But Liam's results came back clean. No toxins, no infection. His actions weren't the result of sickness. He'd known what he was doing. Outside, whispers began. The boy who murdered. The boy who wandered barefoot through snow like it didn't touch him. The boy who didn't scream until morning. Then Shirley, Margaret's daughter, started to act strange. After visiting the warehouse where the mammoth was stored, she developed a fever. One night, in a trance, she attacked her mother. She stabbed Margaret again and again, then leaned over her and poured a strange, clear liquid from her mouth into Margaret's open wounds. Afterward, Shirley walked out barefoot into the snow. Margaret was found barely alive the next morning. Shirley was found dead in a store, collapsed near the freezer aisle, her body stiff and marked with welts. Eugene intensified his investigation. He spoke to Max, who had been working with Yuri, the man suspected of stealing key photographs from Billy's belongings. Max revealed the truth. Yuri had the photos and had seen something in them, something worth killing for. Eugene returned to his hotel room, the same room Billy once stayed in, and noticed that a section of carpet had been replaced. He suspected blood. He confronted Elena again. This time, she shared a memory. On Christmas night, Billy had shown Yuri a photograph, a map to something frozen in the ice. Eric, Hilder's husband and the police chief, had told Yuri to leave. As Yuri walked away, he saw Eric and Billy fighting. He turned to help, but slipped. When he woke, both men were gone. The photograph was still there. Elena didn't tell Eugene any of that. She simply left, later telling Dan not to worry. Eugene had no evidence, which meant Dan and Elena were hiding something deeper. Then Henry found the photo, a hand bound to a cell tower. He took it to the police and said what no one else would. "That's Billy." Dan lied. Yuri, cornered by Eugene, finally talked. He said he saw Eric kill Billy. He even had a bullet he'd found near the tower, the same night Henry had accidentally fired. Yuri claimed the treasure beneath the ice was real and the police were covering it up. That night, Shirley's autopsy revealed something even worse. Her organs were filled with larval sacs, tiny prehistoric insects. Vincent checked Margaret's body. The same thing. He opened her mouth. A swarm of wasps burst out, buzzing, aggressive, alien. The lab filled with smoke as Vincent sealed the room and begged for gas. Dan ordered the burn. The explosion tore through the building. Vincent survived, but barely. Natalie pieced it together. The mammoth was the host. The wasps needed human bodies to grow. Shirley, Margaret, maybe others. And then Elena fell ill. The rot had spread, not just in flesh, but in the lies, the cover-ups, the guilt, in what everyone thought they could bury beneath the snow. But the ice was thawing, and what lay underneath had just started to crawl out. It began with silence. The warehouse was gone, burned to the foundation. The mammoth carcass reduced to blackened bone and bubbling earth. But what had been inside it, what had lived dormant for millennia, was already free. Dan sat in his truck outside the hospital, watching the snow drift sideways. Inside, Elena was unconscious, her breathing shallow, her skin pale and spotted with the same strange welts that had marked Shirley. She hadn't woken since the night he shot her to stop her from stabbing Carrie. Dan couldn't stop thinking about her face, vacant, confused, as if something else had been behind her eyes. Across the hallway, Vincent lay wrapped in bandages, the skin of his arms blistered and raw from the explosion. Still, he lived. He dreamed of wings and buzzing and eyes that saw in ways human eyes could not. When he woke, Natalie was there. She told him the results. Liam never had the toxins. What happened to him wasn't infection. It was intent. They didn't know what that meant. Eugene did, or he had before he bled out in the snow, deep in the wilderness. Henry had shot him, panicked, guilty, unraveling, and then killed himself. Dan found their bodies near the frozen ridge, where the trees grew too close and the wind never stopped howling. Eugene had been holding the map Billy once carried, A map not of treasure, but of a graveyard, hundreds of mammoths frozen beneath the ice, and with them, something older. Back in town, Jason succumbed to the same illness that took Shirley. Before he died, he confessed. He'd killed Ronnie during a fight, stuffed his body under the house. The mammoth tusk was gone. Carrie, now orphaned, wandered the streets in a daze. Dan tried to keep it together. He thought of what Eugene had said before dying. Tell the truth, not for the dead, for the living. But every truth was tangled in something darker. Natalie examined the last tooth Jason had hidden. Inside, fossilized insects, wasps with serrated wings, and no modern analog. She sent a report to Hilda. Her response was short. No one leaves town. Natalie and Vincent tried anyway. They drove to the airport and found the gates locked, the tower dark. All flights grounded. Not because of weather, because of containment. That night, Elena woke. But she wasn't Elena anymore. She attacked a nurse, shattered a mirror, and screamed a wordless sound that echoed through the ward like glass breaking underwater. Dan arrived just in time. He saw the knife in her hand, saw Carrie pinned in the corner. Sobbing. He fired. She fell. Again, silence. At the same moment, miles away, Yuri opened his eyes. He was alive somehow, trapped in the pit below the ice, surrounded by the dead. Mammoths, side by side, stacked like cordwood, and among them, nests, pulsing, moving. Then came the sound, wings, thousands of them. Above ground, Eric found Max near the dig site. They argued, guns raised. Max fled. Eric and Yuri fought. Yuri knocked Eric unconscious and began to descend, but the rope snapped. He fell, landing hard. That was when he saw the full scale of it, a prehistoric hive waiting, alive. He wasn't alone anymore. In town, Margaret had died days earlier, but they hadn't cremated her. Now her body twitched in the morgue. Her eyes opened. The light overhead flickered, then went out. Dan received a call. A video had surfaced, taken from one of Billy's last nights. In it, Billy is laughing, drunk, sitting beside a young woman, Elena. She's crying. The timestamp matches the night Billy died. Dan knew what he had to do. He stood before Hilda and told her everything. About Billy. About Elena. About what happened that Christmas night. How Billy had raped her. How Dan had found him, handcuffed him to a cell tower in the cold. How the bear hadn't killed Billy. Not really. Henry had. Dan cried when he said it. Not because of guilt, because Eugene had been right. I tried to bury it, he said, but it didn't stay buried. Outside the station, people gathered. No one knew what they were waiting for. They just stood there, watching the horizon as if something was coming. In the hospital, Liam stirred. His feet were gone now, amputated to the knee, but his body was healing. Margaret's toxin was never found in him. That should have been good news. But when he opened his eyes, he looked at Natalie and whispered, "It's still here." Then the power went out, and the buzzing began. Above them, in the clouds, a black shimmer spread like ink across paper. Below, in the earth, what was buried began to wake, and the ice was breaking.